And we want to begin by directing attention to something very strange and very mysterious, which occurred about 100 years ago, almost 100 years ago. When Mustafa Kemal and his, they call themselves the Young Turks, were able to seize control of the city of Constantinople from its previous Ottoman rulers, and then send the Sultan Khalifa packing. I believe he was sent to Switzerland. When the new administration took control of the country and of the city, they eventually proclaimed it the Republic of Turkey, the secular Republic of Turkey. But that's not all that they did. They decided, mysteriously so, to move the capital from Constantinople to a place called, at that time it was called Angora. Now it's known as Ankara. And not only did they shift the capital out of Constantinople, but they also changed the name of the city. And they gave to the name, the city, they renamed the city Istanbul. But that's not all. Mustafa Kemal did something more. Something which has to be recognized as monstrously wicked. He prohibited the use of the name Constantinople. The law is you're not allowed to use the name Constantinople. It's the law. You violate the law, you pay the price for it. Why did he do that? My answer is that if you are a Muslim, then Nabi Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam is your leader. And if my leader referred to the city by the name Constantinople, as he did on several occasions, then no Muslim can be part and parcel to changing the name from Constantinople. No. It's an act of disrespect to the Prophet sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa sallam. The enemies may change the name as much as they want, but we Muslims will stay with the name used by the Prophet sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa sallam. And if you prohibit us from using that name, you are wicked. You are committing a monstrous act of zulm. Because I follow Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam, for the rest of this lecture, I am not going to use the name chosen by Mustafa Kemal. For the rest of this lecture, I'm going to use the name that Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam used when he said, لَتَفْتَحَنَّ الْقُنْسْتَنْتِنِيَّةِ. You will most certainly conquer Constantinople. Why did they change the name? I would like to suggest to you that the answer to that question is located in akhir zaman. That when you study akhir zaman or Islamic eschatology, you will quickly realize that the conquest of Constantinople, prophesied by Nabi Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam, has not as yet taken place. And we will prove that tonight. inshallah. That conquest of Constantinople is still to come. But it was part and parcel of the strategy of those who took over from the Ottoman Empire to conceal what is to come, to throw dust in our eyes so that we would forget the subject. We would be lazy in our study of the subject, and we would uncritically assume, in ignorance assume, as so many scholars of Islam have assumed, and it's there in black and white on the internet, they can't erase it now, that they concluded that the conquest of Constantinople by the Ottomans in 1453 fulfilled the prophecy. That's the mountain of a mistake which they made, and they will live to regret that mistake. And so they changed the name of the city in order to obscure the subject. They prohibited the use of the name Constantinople in order to obscure the subject, that we would forget about it. But when the conquest of Constantinople does take place, and from tonight we hope that the subject is going to come back to center stage in the attention of the world, because we now have the internet, we have YouTube to reach all over the world. That when even non-Muslims learn that the Prophet of Islam has prophesied that that city of Constantinople is going to be conquered in the future, and as events move in that direction, the implication would be that Muhammad sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam will be returning to center stage in the world, because no one else, not a single voice in the whole world, the history of the world, none has ever said that Muslims are going to conquer Constantinople in akhir zaman. This is going to cause NATO to have difficulty in digesting their food. This is going to cause Washington and London and Jerusalem and the so-called Islamic government in Turkey to have difficulty in digesting their food, because Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam is now returning to center stage in the world, after they have spent all this time and effort waging war on Islam, demonizing Muslims, demonizing Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam. All of that is now going to be pushed aside as Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam returns to center stage and the Turkish government is exposed. What is the methodology that we will adopt in dealing with this subject of the conquest of Constantinople in akhir zaman? There are some verses of the Qur'an which are plain and clear. They're called muhkamat. But Allah also sent other verses of the Qur'an which are not plain and clear, and which have to be interpreted. And these are called the mutashabihat. So too with a hadith. Sometimes a hadith is plain and clear, muhkam. A city is going to be conquered and the name of the city is given, Constantinople. But sometimes the hadith is not plain and clear. For example, that a Khalifa would die and there would be disagreement concerning succession. Everybody, of course, already know what that applies to. A Khalifa would die and there will be disagreement concerning succession. And while those disagreements are being played out, a man will emerge out of Medina and hurry to Mecca. And in Mecca he'll be proclaimed as Imam al-Mahdi. Who is that Khalifa? There is room for interpretation here. That because a Khalifa is going to die, the implication is that Khilafah will be restored before Imam al-Mahdi, because the word Khalifa is used. And so Hizb ut-Tahrir has built the foundation of the struggle on this, that it is possible for Khilafah to be restored before the advent of Imam al-Mahdi. And our view is no, the word Khalifa here does not stand for the restoration of Khilafah. It refers to any ruler. And in this particular case, we've said for many years now, it's going to be a Saudi king. A Saudi king is going to die. And then you're going to see all the infighting amongst all the princes, which has already started. So you have ahadith which are plain and clear, and others which are not so, and subject to interpretation. But of course, when you interpret, you must always say, Allah knows best. This is not the case with Constantinople. There are several ahadith in which Nabi Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam refers to the city by name when declaring that it will be conquered. Our methodology is to stay with those ahadith in which the city is mentioned by name, or the city can easily be identified as Constantinople. There is no room for different interpretations. And now listen carefully, particularly those who are going to be listening to this lecture on the internet. If there are ahadith which refer to a city, but it is plain as daylight that it is not clear, it is subject to interpretation, and some people assume that that city is Constantinople, while others say no, it's a city in Syria, etc. Then we ask the question, where is the sunnah of literary consistency? Why should Nabi Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam on the same subject be plain and clear in identifying the city, and yet in other so-called alleged ahadith, in other ahadith, it is alleged that he's referring to Constantinople? We say no. Proper methodology is that you stay with the ahadith which plainly identifies the city as Constantinople, in order to maintain the sunnah of literary consistency. And so my methodology is to stay only with these ahadith. When we do that, it will be possible for us, inshallah, before the azan, to demonstrate that the conquest of Constantinople, the prophecy, will be fulfilled in akhir zaman. Did the conquest of Constantinople in 1453 have anything to do with akhir zaman? The whole world has accepted this is the fulfillment of the prophecy. Yet if they had done their homework, they would know, for example, the hadith in the Sunan of Abi Dawood, which we'll be quoting soon, that the conquest of Constantinople is located between a number of events. Before the conquest of Constantinople, there is the Malhama, the Great War, which will make the First and Second World War look like a fight over peanuts. Has the Malhama taken place as yet? Huh? And yet you are telling me that the conquest of Constantinople 600 years ago fulfilled the prophecy? Where has your reason gone? Where has your sense gone? Secondly, that the conquest of Constantinople will be followed by the Khuruj of Dajjal. I mean, 600 years now, has Dajjal emerged? Has the Khuruj taken place? 600 years later. And so we, we are going to now move towards dismissing the belief held so fervently, particularly in Turkey. And Turkish television and radio and newspapers are doing the best that they can do to brainwash the Turkish people into believing that Sultan Al-Fatih is the one referred to in the Hadits of Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam. I hope and I pray that we can get Turkish students to do Turkish subtitles for this lecture so it can reach the Turkish people. Now, we have some more difficult questions to answer. If the conquest of Constantinople is to come, how can Muslims conquer a city they've already conquered? Did you hear that question? It's a bit difficult. How can Muslims conquer a city they've already conquered 600 years ago, 500 years ago? What does it mean? Well, then we have to ask our question. If Muslims are to conquer Constantinople in the future, and it is a Muslim city, meaning basically Muslim population, I wonder who is ruling over Constantinople? Who has supreme authority, strategic, military in Constantinople? Is it Muslims? Good question to ask. What are the political and what are the military implications of an end-time Muslim conquest of Constantinople? This lecture calls for the recognition that if Islamic eschatology is able to answer these questions, and no one else, not Christian eschatology, not Jewish eschatology, not political science departments of universities, only Islamic eschatology can explain this subject and answer these questions, then it is a dramatic demonstration of the supreme importance of Islamic eschatology in today's world of knowledge. In making this spectacular demonstration, Islamic eschatology will also expose the fraud of Zionist-sponsored so-called jihad in Libya and in Syria. Islamic eschatology, in explaining this subject, now opens the possibility for the world to recognize, and maybe for the Russian leadership also to recognize, that Russia, or rather Christian Russia, not atheist Russia, Christian Russia has a significant role to play in akhir zaman, when we turn to the military implications of the conquest of Constantinople, which is coming. Now then, the hadith. We're going to present 4. 3 of them are from the Sunan of Abu Dawood, and 1 is Sahih Muslim. The first one, which is the most well known of all, لَتَفْتَحَنَّ الْقُنْسْتَنْتِنِيَّةَ وَلَنِعْمَ الْأَمِيرُ آمِرُهُ وَلَنِعْمَ الْجَيْشُ ذَلِكَ الْجَيْشُ. You will most certainly conquer Constantinople. Who is you? You meaning Muslims. You. And Muslims who have the Qibla in Mecca, not Washington. Huh? Muslims who are faithful to the Qur'an and Sunnah, not Muslims who violate the Qur'an and Sunnah, violate Allah's command in the Qur'an and establish alliances with the Zionists to overthrow the Libyan regime, and establish alliances with the Zionists to attempt to overthrow and bring regime change in Syria. Not them. You, meaning you who are faithful to the Qur'an and Sunnah. Before this lecture ends, we'd have to demonstrate that those fellas have violated the Qur'an. And so Constantinople is going to be liberated by Muslims, but it'll also be liberated on the basis of an armed struggle. An armed struggle means using weapons, isn't it? An armed struggle means fighting, doesn't it? And that's why Nabi Muhammad ﷺ has praised the army. وَلَنِعْمَ الْجَيْشُ ذَلِكَ الْجَيْشُ. He's praised the army. And the commander-in-chief of the army, the Amir, has to be a supreme strategist, a man who is capable of leading that army successfully. And so we're talking about a military conquest of Constantinople. That's plain and clear. I don't think anybody will argue with that. The reason why I have to do this is because there are other ahadith which do not mention Constantinople by name, which give a different picture. Hadith number 2. It is also from the Sunan of Abu Dawood. And the Prophet ﷺ said, Umranu Bayt al-Maqdis, Umran. At that time when Jerusalem is overflowing with construction, it's built up. Jerusalem is a booming city, booming. So construction, booming state. Jerusalem is flourishing. All of this in Umran. And so Jerusalem moving to center stage. At that time, when this happens, and this is now happening, it wasn't happening 600 years ago, was it? You're very quiet, aren't you? Umranu Baytul Maqdis, Kharabu Yathrib. Umranu Baytul Maqdis, Kharabu Yathrib. At that time when Jerusalem is flourishing, booming, center stage. Construction everywhere. At that time, Yathrib or Medina will be in a forlorn state of desolation. Kharab, forlorn state of desolation, meaning playing absolutely no role, either in Islamic affairs or in world affairs. A forgotten city. At that time, when Yathrib is in a state of forlorn desolation, Khurujul Malhama, at that time, the great war will take place, the Malhama. That great war has been described in several ahadith as a terrible, terrible, terrible war. In fact, a series of wars which will culminate with the biggest war of all. The birds will fall down from the sky. That Malhama has not as yet taken place. But when it does, it's going to make the First World War and the Second World War look like a fight over peanuts. And then the hadith goes on to say, and this is going to be explained in greater detail in the fourth hadith is coming. Khurujul Malhama, Fathul Constantinia. That it is only after you have experienced the Malhama, only then would the conquest of Constantinople take place. And then the hadith ends that the Fathul Constantinia, Khurujul Dajjal, that when Constantinople is conquered, that will be followed by the Khuruj of Dajjal. The release of Dajjal and the Khuruj of Dajjal are two different things. I explained it last week in a lecture entitled Dajjal and Symbolism, which is on YouTube, so you might want to go there for the explanation. Dajjal was released in the lifetime of the Prophet ﷺ. You cannot explain the world today without Dajjal. You cannot explain the modern feminist revolution without Dajjal. You cannot explain women dressed and yet naked without Dajjal. You cannot explain women dressed like men without Dajjal. You cannot explain riba, taking control of the world economy without Dajjal. You cannot explain paper money, bogus, fraudulent, haram paper money, taking control of the monetary system around the world without Dajjal. You cannot explain the liberation for the Jews of the Holy Land, 1917. The return of the Jews to the Holy Land to reclaim it as their own, 1917 to 1948. The restoration of a state of Israel in the Holy Land in 1948. And that Israel constantly growing and growing and growing in power until today it is poised to replace the United States of America as the next ruling state in the world. You cannot explain all of these things without Dajjal. You cannot explain that the US dollar is going to collapse soon and bring down the whole world of paper money. You can't explain these things without Dajjal. Dajjal was released in the lifetime of the Prophet ﷺ. But you cannot see him because he's not in our world of space and time. But when he is in our world of space and time, he emerges as a human being, a Jew, J-E-W, Jew. A young man, powerfully built, curly hair, meaning the curls at the side. And he will declare, I am the Messiah. This is the Khuruj. Similarly with Gog and Magog. I wrote my book on Gog and Magog, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago. But Islamic scholarship seems to have a problem. No, no, no. Gog and Magog will only be released at that time. No, you're making a mistake. You cannot explain the universal facade in every sphere of life today without Gog and Magog. The release of Gog and Magog took place in the lifetime of the Prophet ﷺ. But the khuruj of Gog and Magog will come at that time when Nabi Isa ﷺ has killed Dajjal. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends Gog and Magog in the hadith of Sahih Muslim. And so it is plain from this hadith that the conquest of Constantinople 600 years ago, or 500 years, more than 500 years ago, had absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with the fulfillment of the prophecy of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. We come to a third hadith now. At least one scholar has declared that it is da'if, but he's only one. There are many others who do not share his opinion. When the Prophet ﷺ said, Sunan of Abu Dawood again, he said that the Great War, the Malhama, the conquest of Constantinople, and the khuruj of Dajjal will all take place within a period of 7 months. 500 years ago. This is 7 months. If that was the conquest of Constantinople in 1453, then 7 months after it occurred, the khuruj should have taken place. Has the khuruj of Dajjal taken place? Is he somewhere in Turkey? No. This is lazy scholarship. If you had done your homework, you would have known 550 years ago that this is not the conquest of Constantinople, which was prophesied by the Prophet ﷺ. So the Great War, or the Malhama, the conquest of Constantinople and the khuruj of Dajjal will take place within a period of 7 months. Now we come to the fourth hadith, which is a long one. And this one is Sahih Muslim. It's not easy. It's difficult. It is narrated by Abu Hurairah radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, who says that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam said that the sa'ah, or the hour, will not arise until Rome has landed, come down, in Al-A'maq or Ad-Dabiq, 2 places. And then an army from Medina will come out to them, and it will be from the best people of the earth in that age. And when they line up against each other, Rome will say to the Muslims, do not stand between us and those of you who have captured some of our women in war. So the army of Rome will comprise women as well. We want to fight against them. The Muslims will say, no, by Allah, we will not give you free access to our brothers. Then they will fight them, and 1/3 of the Muslim army will flee, and Allah will never accept their tawbah. And 1/3 will be killed, and they will be the best shuhada in the sight of Allah. And the remaining 1/3 will be victorious, and they will conquer Rome. And they will never again be subjected to any kind of fitna. And then they will conquer Constantinople. So this is the malhama which comes before the conquest of Constantinople. And while they're dividing the booties of war, having hung their swords on olive trees, Shaitan will scream to them, Al-Masih al-Dajjal has taken over your place. That is Al-Masih al-Dajjal, but Shaitan will say Al-Masih has taken over your place in your families you left behind. And so they will leave, although the news is false. But when they reach Syria, Dajjal does come out. Then while they are preparing for battle, lining up in rows, Salat is called, and then Nabi Isa alayhi salam comes down and leads the prayer. When the enemy of Allah sees him, that is Dajjal, he starts dissolving like salt dissolves in water. And if you leave him, he'd continue to dissolve until he dies. But Allah kills him through Nabi Isa alayhi salam, who then shows the blood on his spear. This is Sahih Muslim. The fourth hadith from Sahih Muslim tells us something more. That before Constantinople can be conquered, a Muslim army emerging from the south, Medina is south, would have to first defeat Rome in order to be able to go on to conquer Constantinople. And that the army of Rome would be an army in which women also serve. We're getting interesting now. Who is Rome? When we go to the Qur'an, we get one answer very clear. Rome is the Byzantine, Eastern Christian Empire, which used to have its headquarters in Constantinople. And after Constantinople was conquered by the Ottomans, the capital of Rome went to Russia, Moscow. When the Qur'an describes and identifies Rome with Eastern Christianity, that does not mean that it has exhausted the subject. And when you go to the Hadith, it is possible that the subject can expand. When we go to history, we find that Rome began as a pagan Rome, which worshipped the Greek gods, goddesses. The pagan Roman Empire, which had its capital in the Italian city of Rome. That is the beginning of Rome. And that Rome eventually was taken by the Emperor Constantine, who became a Christian, to the Bosphorus, where he established the city of Constantinople, and that became Rome. At the time when the Qur'an was revealed, Rome was in Constantinople. But prior to the revelation of the Qur'an, Rome was in Italy. And after the conquest of Constantinople in 1453, Rome moved to Moscow. So there are two Romes. One is Christianity of the East, and the other is pagan Rome, which eventually became Christianity of the West, the Roman Catholic Church, the Protestant Church. which of these two fit the bill?